At this point, the chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today the House passed a bipartisan one-year extension of the current interest rate for federally subsidized student loans. And this is a good thing for students across the country. But as we celebrate this accomplishment, let's keep our eye on the larger picture. We wouldn't be worried about these interest rates if it not were for the fact that the economy is so weak and the cost of education is so high. According to the Department of Education, the savings will be $7 a month for the average Stafford loan borrower. And while that might not seem like a lot, each dollar counts for a college graduate still searching for a good-paying job. We can have a larger effect for students by working to repeal federal unfunded mandates that drive up the cost of college tuition and by working to put the wheels back on the economy. As a member of the Subcommittee of Higher Education and Workforce Training, I'm committed to making that happen. Let's work together to ensure that students can secure a quality education at a reasonable cost and get great jobs when they graduate. There's no better social program than a good-paying job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, well, with a few minutes to spare, we just voted to make sure that the interest rate for the Stafford Student Loan Program was going to stay at 3.4% and avoid the doubling of rates which would have happened Saturday night if we had not acted. This is an issue which took months to get to. President Obama challenged Congress back on the State of the Union in January, telling us that we must act. It took months to get any response, and I want to congratulate the 130,000 college students all across America who submitted a petition to the Speaker's office saying it was time to get moving. We started the countdown clock on that day at day 110, and now we are officially defusing the time bomb that would have exploded with a higher interest rate if we had not acted. We have a lot more work to do to deal with high costs of college and student loan debt, which now exceeds credit card debt and consumer loan debt. But having said that, we saw today an honest compromise, people coming together to make sure that that lower rate was going to be extended. Let's use that example to move forward and solve this problem for middle-class families all across America. Again, to those students who work so hard to have their voices heard, congratulations. Let's roll up our sleeves and continue the great work. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi rise?
Address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today is a good day for the people of Mississippi's 4th Congressional District, and it's a good day for all the people of the Gulf states, because today, with passage of the Restore Act, we give these states the tools they need to continue vital economic and environmental recovery. Less than a year ago, a small group of Gulf Coast legislators came together with big support from their communities and a mission to make the Gulf Coast whole. This was no small effort, but it is the least we could do to show our support once more to all those affected by the single largest man-made disaster in our history. I am proud to have been a part of this landmark legislation. I want to thank all those who worked so hard with us to make this happen, from my Gulf Coast colleagues, House leadership, to local leaders, business, and conservation groups. There were so many who said this could not be done in an election year with so much competing for time on the legislative calendar, but we knew how important it was to pass this bill. We did not give up because we knew that restoring and replenishing the Gulf Coast is more than just a responsible decision. It is the right thing to do. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as people in the United States evaluate what happened this past weekend in the presidential election in Egypt, I have a simple message. We shouldn't deceive ourselves. At a time when we are focused on stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program and on isolating the Iranian regime, the incoming Egyptian president vows to expand ties with Iran. At a time when families in southern Israel constantly live in fear of Qassam rocket attacks from Hamas-controlled Gaza, the incoming Egyptian president vows to expand ties with Hamas. As for relations with Israel, we should not paper over the most obvious reason for alarm. While the incoming president has recently pledged to honor the Camp David Accords, it is our responsibility to ensure that the U.S. goodwill is not taken advantage of and painfully looked upon as naive. We must understand that the Muslim Brotherhood has very clear history of opposing the peace treaty. And 6 weeks ago, the incoming President, Mohamed Morsi, stated, "Jihad is our path, and death for the sake of Allah is our most lofty aspiration." While we welcome the democratic process, Mr. Speaker, this result is nothing to cheer. We must not be in denial of what the Muslim Brotherhood really wants.
For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor longtime Bakersfield icon Wendy Wayne, who passed away on June 17th after a 4-year struggle with cancer. Wendy was the type of person who would go out of the way for those in need, personally taking action to make sure those in need were helped. She was instrumental in leading the Community Connection for Child Care in Bakersfield and later the first 5 current organizations which serve the youth of our community. You know, one of my fondest memories was just 2 years ago where Wendy joined me in this house. She was my guest for the State of the Union. Sometimes we had philosophical difference, but it never changed our friendship. Wendy will forever be known as the Mother Teresa of Bakersfield. She will be missed, but her deeds in her life will not be forgotten. I yield back.
For what purposes, gentlelady from New York, rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor Corporal Kyle R. Schneider. Carl R. Schneider was born on January 8, 1988, to Richard and Lori Schneider. He was raised in the Baldwinsville, New York area with his brother Kevin. Kyle was a graduate of Baker High School in Baldwinsville and attended Onondaga Community College for 1 year in the criminal justice program. While at Baker High School, he played baseball, football, and ran track. He loved the outdoors, and he was an avid hunter and fisherman. In March of 2008, Kyle joined the United States Marine Corps, and in January of 2011 was assigned to the 3rd Platoon and deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. In defense of our nation, Kyle was killed in the Helmand province in Afghanistan on June 30th, 2011 by an improvised explosive device. Kyle Schneider was 23 years old. As we commemorate the 1st anniversary of his death, let us honor the service and sacrifice of Corporal Kyle R. Schneider. He is an American hero. He was a proud and valiant Marine. He was also a son, a brother, a grandson, a fiancé, friend, and comrade. Kyle is greatly missed, and no words will diminish the grief of those who knew and loved him. In his death, Kyle R. Schneider has earned the thanks of a grateful nation. I yield back.
The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Clyburn of South Carolina for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. For purposes, gentleman from Michigan, rise. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. Today, this House voted to extend the cap on student loan interest rates, or at least certain student loans, for an additional year. That's fine, but it's only a Band-Aid. Over 1 million Americans, and this is just one box of many that contains petition signatures, say that they want more relief. They want their student loan debt cut, reduced, and excessive debt forgiven. So let's listen to over 1 million Americans who want the student loan debt forgiven in this country so that we can give people hope and create jobs. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the committee's referral be discharged from the further consideration of H.R. 6064 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Report the title.
Done.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6064, a bill to provide an extension of federal aid highway, highway safety, motor carrier safety, transit, and other programs funded out of the Highway Trust Fund, pending enactment of a multi-year law reauthorizing such programs.
Is there objection to consideration of the bill? Without objection, the bill is engrossed, read a third time, and passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair will recognize members for special order speeches without prejudice to the possible resumption of legislative business. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. West, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today not only as a member of Congress, but as a citizen of the great state of Florida. My fellow Floridians are frustrated with the federal government for imposing more and more burdensome regulations that continues to hurt our already struggling state and nation. The President's policies have failed and are making this economy worse. While the President continues to give speeches on the principles of job growth, his administration continues to push and pursue job-killing policies that threaten this country's economic recovery. In fact, since President Obama took office, we've seen a 52% increase in completed regulations deemed economically significant. This meant these regulations are costing the economy at least $100 million each year. Mr. Speaker, this is worth repeating so the American people clearly understand. Since January of 2009, this President has increased by more than 50% the regulations costing at least $100 million annually. The President cannot stand on the record of the last 3.5 years, so he has regrettably turned to the politics of envy and division. We cannot create a fair system for job creators when the federal government keeps changing the rules. We can't help the job seeker by punishing the job creator with more government red tape. According to a September 2010 report from the Small Business Administration, total regulatory costs amount to $1.75 trillion annually. Put another way, this $1.75 trillion of regulatory burden is enough money for businesses to provide 35 million private sector jobs with an average salary of $50,000. According to the same report, small businesses, which have created 64% of all new jobs in the past 15 years, face an annual regulatory cost of $10,585 per employee, which, Mr. Speaker, is 36% higher than the regulatory costs facing large firms. Yet, rather than provide incentives for these businesses to expand and create jobs, the Obama administration raises taxes and imposes unnecessary, burdensome layers of red tape that impede private sector investment and destroy jobs. In the last few months, we've heard a lot about fairness from the President, especially when it comes from the so-called rich. Accompanying President Obama's budget for fiscal year 2013 was a simple message to the American people: everyone must shoulder their fair share. Mr. President, the free market is not about fairness. This is not Little League Baseball, where everyone gets a trophy. This is nothing fair about the federal government telling you what kind of light bulbs you can use to light your home, how many gallons of water you can use to flush your toilet, and which kinds of food your children have to consume. While the President continues his Kansas City shuffle, trying to get the American people to look right while he goes left, he continues to try and turn the attention of the American people away from his policies that continue to drag the economy down. The facts speak for themselves. Today, there are more federal regulations on the books than at any other time in the history of our nation. The Obama administration currently has proposed 3,118 regulations, with 167 considered economically significant. In 2011 alone, Mr. Speaker, there were 79,000 new pages printed in the Federal Register. The same year, the Obama administration issued $231.4 billion in regulatory burdens from proposed or final rules. Today, there are 291,676 unelected federal regulatory agency employees surrounding the United States Capitol. According to the Financial Services Roundtable, it will take 24,503 employees just to comply with the flood of regulations emanating from the Dodd-Frank banking regulation. According to a February 15, 2012 Gallup poll, 48% of small businesses said they were not hiring due to concerns about possible rising health care costs, while 46% said they were worried about new government regulations. A 2010 study by the Heritage Foundation found that an unprecedented 43 major regulations were imposed in fiscal year 2010, with a total economic cost of $26.5 billion, the highest total since at least 1981. A recent report from the Heritage Foundation also found that during the 3 years of the Obama administration, a total of 106 new major regulations have been imposed at a cost of more than $46 billion annually and nearly $11 billion in one-time implementation costs. This amount is about 5 times the cost imposed by the prior administration of President George W. Bush. Mr. Speaker, I think it is essential the American people understand just a few proposed Obama administration regulations that will cost each of us billions of dollars. Reconsideration of the 2008 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standards, estimated cost $19 to $90 billion. It was withdrawn in September 2011. National emission standards for hazardous air pollutants for coal and oil-fired electric utility steam generating units, estimated cost $10 billion. National emission standards for hazardous air pollutants for major source industrial and commercial and institutional boilers and process heaters, estimated cost $3 billion. Standards for the management of coal combustion residuals generated by commercial electric power producers, estimated cost $6 million to $1.5 billion. Require motor carriers operating commercial motor vehicles in interstate commerce to use electronic onboard recorders to document their drivers' hours, estimated cost $2 billion. Hours of service on commercial motor vehicle drivers, estimated cost $1 billion. A Consumer Product Safety Commission rule deeming children's books printed prior to 1986 to be potentially toxic due to the possibility of excessive lead in the ink, even though the actual risk of the lead exposure from older books only ranks at 0.5 on a scale of 1 to 10, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Nonetheless, the Consumer Product Safety Commission has urged libraries to put older children's books in storage until they can be tested for lead toxicity at a cost of $300 to $500 for each book. The federal government's attempt to regulate the precise moisture, temperature, and chemical standards of compost for use in producing certified organic foods. The Department of Energy's desire to rewrite water efficiency standards for the nation's urinals. Yes, rewrite water efficiency standards for the nation's urinals. That's correct, Mr. Speaker. An Equal Opportunity Employment Opportunity Commission declaration that requiring a high school diploma as a job certification has a desperate impact on certain individuals that fail to meet such a standard. A Department of Justice regulation requiring enhanced access for disabled individuals at a public and private facilities such as swimming pools. And of course, numeric nutrient criteria, which I will discuss later. It's no surprise why entrepreneurship in the United States of America is at a 17-year low. In 2010, the Obama administration published 82,480 pages of regulations. Two comprehensive legislative packages, the Affordable Care Act and Dodd-Frank banking regulations, were passed and scheduled to regulate greenhouse gases as well for the first time ever in the history of this country. In 2011, agencies finalized $187 million in deregulatory actions and proposed more than $1.1 billion in rescissions. However, these deregulatory measures were dwarfed by the new regulations that the administration published just this year. For proposed or final rules, the Obama administration published $231.4 billion in regulatory burdens and 133 million paperwork burden hours. Assuming a 2,000-hour work year, it would take 66,730 employees just to file the federal paperwork. On average, Mr. Speaker, eliminating the job of a single regulator would grow the American economy by 6.2 million and nearly 100 private sector jobs annually. The reverse is true as well. With each $1 million increase in the regulatory budget, that costs the economy 420 private sector jobs. A recent article in The Economist highlighted the increased complexity caused by Obamacare, citing that every hour spent treating a patient in America creates at least 30 minutes of paperwork and often a whole hour. Next year, the number of federally mandated categories of illness and injury for which hospitals must claim reimbursement will rise from 18,000 to 140,000. There are 9 codes, Mr. Speaker, relating to injuries caused by parrots. Yes, parrots. And 3 relating to burns emanating from flaming water skis. Let's be real clear at this point of time. The only jobs created by regulations are jobs for regulators and more regulators. What I notice when I ride up and down Federal and Dixie highways in South Florida are the numbers of closed storefronts, the numbers of vacant spaces. However, when I fly into Washington, D.C., Mr. Speaker, I see the number of sky cranes building more housing and office space for these regulators. The number of federal workers employed in regulatory activities, excluding the TSA, has jumped 20% since 2008. But while total workforce participation in the United States of America is at a 30-year low. Our nation has faced 3 years of unemployment at or above 8%. Mr. Speaker, do you want to guess what the unemployment rate is in Washington, D.C.? In May, the unemployment in Washington, D.C. metro area was 5.3%. Of course, the environment is only one area of regulatory overreach by the Obama administration. In its review of the overregulated America, The Economist magazine noted that the Dodd-Frank banking law, at 848 pages, is 23 times longer than the preceding Glass-Steagall Act. These regulations are choking off the oxygen of growth in this country, especially in our area in South Florida. Mr. Speaker, let me take a moment to talk about an example which has taken place in our congressional district. In 2006, Rybovich Yachts became the only company in the United States capable of repairing mega yachts with the opening of its facility in West Palm Beach. The company took a dilapidated boatyard and turned it into the finest repair facility in the world. This facility now employs 230 workers directly and as many as 300 subcontractors each and every day. The facility quickly exceeded all business expectations, attracting customers from around the globe and cementing South Florida's leadership position in the marine industry. Last year, this facility generated $5.5 million in local and state tax revenue. Consider the regulatory hurdles Rybovich had to leap through, the mountains of paperwork in order to get a permit issued, and the burdensome red tape they endured every step of the way. Mr. Speaker, it is remarkable that any U.S. company chooses to do business on its own shores. To satisfy the environmental regulations and requirements for the first facility, Rybovich was required to inspect and analyze every other possible location in the area to see if there was an alternate site that would have less impact on local seagrass beds. Once the location was chosen, the environmental impact had to be measured and mitigated one for one. In the case of Rybovich, 5 acres of seagrass needed to be replaced. Since there are limited areas where seagrass could be replanted in the vicinity, the company, Rybovich, a private sector company, had to buy an island, construct a wall around it, and plant seagrass. The island alone cost the company $4 million. In 2008, Rybovich realized there was market potential for a second facility to service even larger yachts. Construction for this new facility is estimated to create over 600 jobs. The total economic impact from the first 5 years of operations is estimated to be $630 million in Palm Beach County and $111 million in the city of Riviera Beach. One would think, after going through the permitting process and jumping through all the environmental hurdles to open the first facility, the second would go more smoothly. One would think. One would think, given the state of our local economy, a new project of this scope will be welcomed with open arms. But, Mr. Speaker, 4 years later, Rybovich still hasn't received a permit for its proposed project in Riviera Beach. And did I mention the 600 jobs that would be created? That's correct. I did. However, the federal regulators don't seem to care about that fact. What is happening to Rybovich is not an isolated incident. This is happening all over the United States. Rybovich is merely a whiff of the toxic bureaucratic fumes emanating from the Obama administration that regulators are using to choke off job and economic growth with excessive environmental regulation. Another case in point is the numeric nutrient criteria. The Environmental Protection Agency has proposed ludicrous standards for Florida's nitrogen and phosphorus levels for the state's lakes, rivers, streams, and springs. Until 2009, the state of Florida was working cooperatively with the EPA to improve our water quality standards. However, in 2009, in an attempt to settle a lawsuit brought by environmental groups, the EPA decided to abandon that cooperative approach, federally preempt our water quality state standards, and impose new criteria on our state. Like all Floridians, I want clean and safe water. For several years now, Florida has been working to improve its water quality, and in many respects, the state's efforts have been a model for other states throughout this country. As Florida Wildlife Commissioner Ron Bergeron explains, a water standard of 10 parts per billion required by numeric nutrient criteria is more stringent, Mr. Speaker, than rainwater, which is 15 parts per billion, and is a quality of water that is humanly impossible to achieve. Even the EPA's own Science Advisory Board has expressed serious concerns about the science used to support the regulation, and the EPA has repeatedly refused to allow a third-party review of the proposal. But there is no doubt about one thing, Mr. Speaker. This mandate is poisonous to the economy. These regulations are not about whether we want clean water for Florida. These regulations are about how we reach that goal and at what cost. This EPA mandate, which singles out the state of Florida, will drive up the cost of doing business, double water bills for all Florida families, and will destroy jobs. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection estimates this federal mandate may force municipal wastewater and storm water utilities to spend as much as $26 billion in capital improvements to upgrade their facilities. This $26 billion will eventually be paid by each Floridian who uses water, and that means every resident. A study by the University of Florida and the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services concluded that the EPA's numeric nutrient criteria regulations would directly cost Florida's agricultural community roughly $1 billion each year, with additional indirect costs also exceeding $1 billion. This billion-dollar cost eventually will be paid by every American who wants to enjoy an orange, a grapefruit, or other produce that comes from our state. The study goes on to say that implementation of the EPA regulations could put more than 14,000 agricultural workers out of a job and would cost the average household up to $990 in higher sewer rates. That is per year, per family, $990 more in higher water bills. Can our already stagnant economy in Florida take that? Will families move to Florida and choose to buy homes in our already depressed housing market if they're going to have to pay nearly $1,000 more in their annual water bills for years to come? The EPA has repeatedly refused to allow any third-party review of the science behind the proposed mandate of numeric nutrient criteria. The EPA has also failed to complete an economic analysis. In a disturbing article in the New York Times on February the 16th of 2011, an EPA official said they have no plans to implement this regulation in any other state except for the state of Florida. Excessive EPA regulations hamper business expansion and job growth in nearly every industry. They hurt farmers. They hurt utility workers, pipe fitters, construction workers, coal miners, factory workers, truck drivers, and machinists. 60 national companies and dozens of Florida-based companies and organizations, including the United States Chamber of Commerce and the American Farm Bureau, have sent letters to the United States Congress to oppose these burdensome regulations. Mr. Speaker, we must reduce the regulatory burden on our nation's businesses and help put Americans back to work. We must get the federal government out of the way of our small businesses and entrepreneurs so that they can succeed and prosper. When there is a need for regulations, there should be developed in concert with the private sector and, of course, done with common sense. Over the last few months, the United States House of Representatives has passed more than 24 bills designed to do just that: staunch the toxic regulatory flow coming from the federal agencies. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, they're all still sitting on Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's desk, which really does stink. John Engler, the president of the Business Roundtable, recently stated that regulations are hidden taxes that strangle job creation. We need action by government agencies to clear out obsolete rules and streamline permitting to reduce delays and impediments for companies to invest and grow. The private sector is the only hope for future job creation. We need to recognize this and work together to let businesses, small and large, invest in people. And, Mr. Speaker, I could not have said that any better. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members may be aware that I come to the floor occasionally in order to make certain that members have the full background as they find themselves in the perplexing situation of receiving legislation on a local government. We had a misunderstanding. I can only think it was a misunderstanding this week when Senator Rand Paul, who I know has been a student of history when it comes to the Constitution, engaged in actions that had the effect of compelling a bipartisan group of senators to pull back a budget autonomy for the District of Columbia. First, recognize that the framers didn't go to war with American citizens, including citizens who live right in the very territory where we are now, the District of Columbia. They did not go to war with our citizens only to leave them out of the very franchise and local control that made them commit what I'm sure the British believed were acts of treason because they rebelled. Thank you. They rebelled against England for its refusal to recognize that taxes are a matter of local control. Bear in mind that those who went to war included the residents of this city, and that the framers in every respect showed that they respected the fact that the citizens of this city were included in the reasons they went to war. For example, in the transition period, 10 years between the time that the District of Columbia became the nation's capital, the framers of the Constitution in the Constitution from Maryland and from Virginia made sure through legislation that their members lost nothing because Maryland and Virginia had donated land to the nation for our nation's capital. And so they voted in their former jurisdictions, Maryland, Virginia. They voted for representation, and they were treated like other Americans. In 1802, when the full passage occurred, they lost what they had been promised. They lost their full rights as American citizens. The district got back some of those rights under a Republican president when the district was given home rule, the right to govern itself under the Home Rule Act. Richard Nixon said at the time, "I share the chagrin that most Americans feel at the fact that Congress continues to deny self-government to the nation's capital. I would remind the Congress that the Founding Fathers did nothing of the sort. Home rule was taken from the district only after more than 70 years of self-government, and this was done on grounds that were either factually shaky or morally doubtful." And so the Congress returned the district to some measure of home rule. In returning that measure of home rule, the Congress nevertheless said to the district that while it had authority over its own budget, it should essentially come to the Congress of the United States before that budget became final. We are trying, as I speak, to make sure that that budget does not become a vehicle for denying the very principles that the framers fought for and that every American stands for. This is not a country where you can pay taxes and somebody else can have something to say over how those taxes will be used. That would cause another rebellion. And so when the matter was put to American citizens, here is what they said. More than 7 in 10 Americans believe that the District of Columbia should control its own budget. I suppose in America people are saying, duh, of course. It's a basic founding principle. Why do you need to tell us that? We need to tell you that because there are attempts here, and there was an attempt in the Senate that went counter to the bipartisan consensus that is arising for local control by the district of its own local funds, funds that not one member of this body has had anything to do with raising. So you put that to American people, you get a predictable answer. 7 in 10. What does that mean in terms of Democrats and Republicans? 71% of Democrats, and by the way, 72% of Republicans. I'm not surprised at that figure. 71% of Americans, slightly more, 72% of Republicans believe that the people who pay taxes and happen to live in their nation's capital should be treated as full American citizens when it comes to how they spend their own local funds. Well, that principle is not recognized over and over again in this body, and that's why I've come to the floor today, because I do not believe that the failure to recognize this principle comes from venality. I think it comes because there is turnover in the Congress and because people don't focus on the bill, so they simply do what they are told to do. They don't go into much analysis of why they're doing it. And I can tell you that I know they don't go into much analysis of why they're doing it. The District of Columbia last year was almost shut down 3 separate times. I don't think I could find a member of this body, in fact, I'm sure I can't, who would say that when the federal government is engaged in a federal fight over federal spending, the District of Columbia should have to shut down too. But that was the case because the District of Columbia budget, which had been approved, their balanced budget, unlike our own, had been approved by the Appropriations Committee, was still here. And because it was still here and for no other reason, the District of Columbia 3 different times had to prepare for shutdown. had to prepare for the consequences of the possible reneging on contracts through no fault of their own. It's important to note that the Senate appropriation bill this year does contain my no shutdown bill for the District of Columbia, which simply says the District of Columbia doesn't shut down if the District of Columbia, if the federal government shuts down, if the federal government shuts down, and says, of course, that if you're spending your own local money, that's for you to do. When I say we have a bipartisan group of leaders that have come to support budget autonomy, I'm speaking of leaders who've been in the Congress, who've been in the district, and have seen what the effects of not treating the district as a full local control jurisdiction have been. In this very House, I am grateful to Chairman Darrell Issa, chairman of the committee with some jurisdiction over the District of Columbia, who is a leading proponent of budget autonomy, and so much so for the District of Columbia, so much so that he has his own bill for budget autonomy, very much like my own. In the Senate, Senator Joe Lieberman and Senator Susan Collins had a bipartisan bill in committee for budget autonomy for the District of Columbia, much like Chairman Issa's. Chairman Issa's bill has been supported by Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Chairman Issa's bill has been supported by the Republican governor of the state of Virginia. And so when we note what happened in the Senate, we cannot believe that that came from venality or some sense that the District of Columbia is not a city whose citizens should be treated as other American citizens are treated. And yet, as the bill went to committee, Senator Rand Paul appeared to have proposed any and every amendment he could think of, amendments that no self-respecting American jurisdiction could possibly abide, not because there's anything inherently wrong with these amendments, but because they run counter to what the voting majority of tax-paying residents of the District of Columbia have in their own laws. These amendments, the senator said, were not because he disagrees with this or that policy and he wants to make sure the district does this or that thing. He says, I think it's a good way to call attention to some issues that have national implications. We don't have control over the states, but we do for D.C. Oh, really? What control do you have over our local funds? Do you raise a cent of it? This is a misunderstanding, and since Senator Rand Paul founded the Tea Party caucus in the Senate and is the champion of small government and local control there, I choose to believe that this freshman senator had not come to grips with the rather complicated history of the nation's capital. If so, I don't think he would have put forward an amendment that would require our citizens to allow concealed and carry permits here. We don't have any problem with concealed and carry in the United States. But that's not what the people of the District of Columbia who pay taxes have written into their laws, their constitutional laws. Moreover, public safety is the essence of local control. If you were looking to the 2 or 3 issues that nobody should have anything to say about in your own local jurisdiction, surely it would be the police power, when that power is consistent with the Constitution. And then a whole stream of other amendments came forward, some of them on abortion, one of them on licensed firearm dealer, one of them having to do with labor organizations. It's as if the senator went down a checklist and said, in fact, I think he did. He virtually said so himself and said, what can I highlight using the District of Columbia as if this city were nothing but a plaything, not a jurisdiction of 600,000 American citizens who have fought and died in every war, including the war that created the United States of America, of 600,000 citizens whose rate of payment of federal taxes is second per capita in the United States. 600,000 citizens, one of whom was killed in Afghanistan last month. 600,000 Americans who have every right to demand equal citizenship. The news from bipartisan support and from polls continues to roll in. The Senate of the United States has just passed out of committee our budget. The most the Senate should be if our budget is here. The most the House should be if our budget is here is a pass-through. Because as of now, we don't have budget autonomy. There is nothing, however, either in American principle or American history, which says that once you have to pass the budget through here, then you can just do everything you want to do to it, even though it has to do with funds that you had nothing to do with raising. And look, I met Tea Party people for the first time when they came to Congress. I thought this was their most original principle. In fact, Senator Rand Paul would like to get the federal government out of issues where the Constitution allows the federal government historically. What about hopping over those issues and trying to engage in the business of a local jurisdiction? That's not against his principles. That's against everything the framers stood for. An overwhelming majority, we have found, these are polls within the last few months, believes Congress should pass a D.C. budget without changes. Well, who are these overwhelming majority? 78% of them are Democrats. Once again, Republicans lead the pack. 81% are Republicans. You want to know how this was framed? This is how the question was framed. Today, members of Congress are withholding approval of Washington, D.C.'s local budget unless the city agrees to a series of unrelated provisions on issues ranging from guns to abortion. Do you think Congress should or should not interfere in the city's local affairs and budget in this way? So if anything, the issue was framed against us, because you can bet your bottom dollar that of this 81% of Republicans who answered Congress should not interfere with D.C.'s local affairs and budget were many who in fact oppose abortion and oppose any restraint on guns for gun owners or otherwise. And yet, if you ask them a base question, if you ask them a fundamental question, if it's your money, should a national body in Washington have any right whatsoever to impose their will on your locally based budget? You know, Congress does lag occasionally behind the American people. This is a big lag. But it doesn't lag behind leaders of this House and leaders of the Senate. Senator Joe Lieberman is leaving or retiring this year. He has been a champion of equal citizenship for the residents of the District of Columbia, whether it's voting rights or statehood or budget autonomy. That this issue in many ways partially defines his service. But I must say that the first budget autonomy bill to pass at all in Congress came from Senator Susan Collins. That was some years back. It went all the way to the floor and was passed in a Republican Senate. It was the House that did not pass it. So when I say I'm talking about first principles, I think there is great evidence that those first principles resonate in the Senate and resonate in the House. They resonate in the House when Representative Issa puts forward a budget autonomy bill. It resonates in the House when Majority Leader Cantor, in fact, says he supports budget autonomy. I don't believe that the average member wants the opportunity to use 600,000 American citizens as playthings through their budget. We joust with one another. We disagree with one another. But I don't believe when it comes to this serious matter, if we had an opportunity one-on-one to speak with members of this body, they would give you a justification for this kind of treatment. That is why I say this afternoon that this comes from a misunderstanding that I hope by coming to the floor I can help clear up. It comes from a misunderstanding because it lies in the face of the very principles that particularly members of this House have professed from the moment the 112th Congress convened. Get the federal government out of our lives, even where the federal government has historically been in our lives. Get the federal government out of any opportunity to get in our lives. Witness the view of the Republican House on the Affordable Health Care Act. Up with local control, and when it comes to our money, hands off. Well, you can imagine that when we raise $4 billion in the District of Columbia from local citizens, we wouldn't want anybody telling us anything about how to spend it. We spend that money on some issues and in some ways that are different from the way my colleagues spend money. Isn't that what is most wonderful about America? The framers put together a country that was so different that the way they kept us from going at war with one another was to separate out local from federal and to say, if you stay in your part, we won't go there. We will only go where matters of national concern are to be found. That was the promise. And I must say, for my colleagues, that's the promise that's been kept for every American jurisdiction except our own. And that is why I have called Senator Rand Paul. I've not been able to speak to him yet. I am going to ask to sit down with him. I'm going to walk over to the Senate to see if I can have a good conversation with him about the District of Columbia, because I have no reason to believe, given his own short history in the Senate, that he means to do anything but carry out his own originalist principles, his principles that local control is different from federal intervention, and that given a conversation we can at least make some headway on what the district means to our country and how the citizens of this city feel when they basically feel kicked around. We're powerless to do anything about it. If a bill comes to the floor which keeps us from spending our own money, every member of this body can vote on that bill except the member that represents the District of Columbia, because as yet the Congress has not, in fact, given the district the voting rights that we have given to the people of Afghanistan and Iraq, with citizens from the District of Columbia among those fighting for their freedom. So I don't think anybody would blame us for coming forward to ask for what every other American takes for granted. What is truly gratifying to me, even as I complain about the loss of budget autonomy in committee that Senator Joe Lieberman and Senator Susan Collins had worked so hard to perfect, what encourages me is first, the leadership we have in the House for budget autonomy, the leadership that continues to stand strong with us in the Senate. But most of all, Mr. Speaker, what encourages me are what these two charts tell us about our country. Tell us about what they believe, and tell us about what they overwhelmingly believe. American citizens have a right to when it comes to their own funds raised by them and them alone. And yes, I take heart in the fact that while there are only small differences between Democrats and Republicans, those who most favor control of the city's own budget by its own local citizens are our Republican citizens, who are, it seems to me, only confirming their own principles. And when it comes to whether or not the Congress, when a budget comes here, should make it clean, just as it was when it came, or should in some way use it to profile national issues, you have even greater majorities essentially sending Congress a message that Congress should pass our local budget without changes. 78% of Democrats, 81% of Americans regard this as something of a truism. I know that my colleagues represent the people included in these massive majorities, and I don't expect my colleagues to spend a lot of time on the District of Columbia. I ask only when the budget of a local jurisdiction comes here that there be some thought behind what you do when you have the vote on that budget and I do not. That in a real sense I ask you to put yourself in my position. I am a member of the House of Representatives. I have the same standing that all of you have, except I do not have the vote. I would be so bold as to ask my colleagues to put themselves in my position when they see members of this House or members of the Senate try to direct the district about how it ought to spend its own local funds. I ask you to put yourself in my position because I think there would be some genuine empathy with the position in which I find myself representing a citizen, 600,000 citizens who have lived up to every obligation of citizenship ever since the founding of the republic of which they were a part, but never without equal citizenship. We will continue to come forward in good faith and in the spirit of understanding, and in the hope that with greater highlighting of the discrepancies between our professed principles and how they are occasionally carried out, change will come in a country which is always striving to live up to its own ideals. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert.